are now welcoming to our program, back to our program, that is, Dr. John Paitakes, our criminal justice analyst. He's here to discuss prison overcrowding in the States, this following the recent prison unrest and breakouts in other countries like Nigeria, Honduras, and now, as you've just heard, Mexico.
Well, in fact, here in the U.S., we're dealing with prison population overflow, and many states are looking at new ways of dealing with prison issues. Doctor, let's talk about the fueling of this growth in the prison population. What's behind it?
Yeah, there's a combination of things, Brian. Very strict drug laws with mandatory sentences were imposed in the 70s, and what that did was fill up the prisons to a certain extent. 3 strikes you're out legislation. If you commit 3 violent crimes, 25 years prison maximum, mandatory. There's no early release on that. Increase in, parole releases, and the recidivism rates, the repeat offender rates, over 50%, so are going back. So it's a combination of those things, Brian, and now we're faced with that overcrowdedness in most states.
So how do we address this dilemma?
Yeah, there's a combination of different things that prison officials are looking at. As people age out in the prison system, they age out of crime, so they're talking about releasing more senior citizens, okay? But of course you always have to make sure of the risk even of a senior citizen. That's one possibility. The other is changing some of the parole laws. Normally you're eligible in 1/3 the time in a lot of states, but they're talking about reducing the eligibility to maybe 1/4 the time. Increasing good time credits. Every month that you're in as an inmate, you get 3 or 4 days off your sentence. They're talking about increasing that. So there's a combination of things they're looking at. They're even contracting with private prisons to take some of the overflow, because private prisons will take it for profit, you know. And there are a few states that are under population in the prisons, and they're willing to take them for a fee.
Right? Oh, really?
So, yeah, I mean, corrections is big business.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of money on corrections.
And is there a difference between violent and non-violent offenders?
Oh, yeah, and that's what they're trying to target right now. The violent, dangerous person who's doing the murders and rapes certainly has to be incarcerated. But your drug-addicted person who does a crime, they're looking at, like in New Jersey and a number of other states, drug courts. Rehabilitation, outpatient basis first. Let's cure the problem, and then maybe that'll stop the crime. So
a couple of interesting statistics recently that some prison authorities came up with. That roughly 70% of the prison population are people who are nonviolent offenders who are in for drug offenses.
Right.
And the other side of this coin is that some of the 3rd strike offenders in California, the guy who's the poster child for 3 strikes, his 3rd strike was for stealing a pizza.
Yeah.
So, these things are really fueling that growth,
right.
and the critics are saying, well, wait a minute, we've got to do something besides just take a bite out of crime.
Right. We got to think smart and creatively as to what we're doing with these people. Certainly, like you said, the violent people deserve to be in there, but there's a lot of other intermediate sanctions: electronic monitoring, home detention, halfway houses. New Jersey just did, or is going to do again, Operation Safe Surrender, where there's outstanding warrants in every state every month, and instead of, if you're picked up on a warrant, you go right to jail. But Safe Surrender says we give you a 3-day grace period, turn yourself in at a certain location, and we'll release you on your own recognizance, okay, instead of going to jail, except for the violent offenders. They did it recently in Somerset County right here, and 5,000 people gave up.
Wow.
And 90% of them were released on their own. So look at the savings right there. So again, we're looking at a lot of different creative ways, and there are.
Is that something that's expanded beyond New Jersey?
Yeah. In fact, there was another state that we looked at. I think it was Ohio first, and now it's starting to, be considered by a lot of other states because it's cost effective.
Now, is there anything the public can help to do, like us civilians, non-violent civilians?
Okay, I'll take your name down, Lucy. There are some things the public can do. They've done these faith-based initiatives where they apply to the churches and ask them to host a 1-day conference. People from the community come and they ask them to volunteer. No money or anything, but would you volunteer to transport somebody who's on parole to a counseling appointment, to help them write a resume, to help them fill out a job application? So that's one possibility. You can volunteer with any court system in the state several days a month to help with court processing, therefore freeing up the other administrative people to do direct service.
Right, so have the people do community service. Is the public responding to that?
In certain areas where they did it in Newark, they did it in New Brunswick and Camden, and they had a fair good response, okay? And now they're doing the follow-up to try and, call these people back and give us your time frames, et cetera. So, again, there is something the public can do if they want to volunteer their time,
You mentioned a point that incarceration is big business.
Yeah.
And I wonder, are there studies that suggest that there is a correlation between the private prisons and how strongly the laws are applied? In other words, are we putting more people in prison when we don't have to, simply because of the pressure by a corporate sector?
Or a lobbyist?
Exactly.
Well, I don't have an exact answer on that. The private prison, why they become attractive, although not all states have gone, and we haven't gone with any state prisons privately. We use them for halfway houses and less secure facilities. They charge a lesser amount. It costs about $40,000 a year to keep an inmate in a state prison here. Let's say a private company comes along and says, we can do it for $25,000. Well, you also have to look at, are they providing the same service? Are the correctional officers trained through an academy, which usually they're not. It's on the job training. So you really have to look at the differences. But again, there's enough overflow out there that the private companies are doing fairly well, because a lot of other states have contracted much more so than us with the private ones. So there is a market for the private corrections, and I think that'll continue.
Yeah, final question for you.
Yeah.
Brown v. Plata. How does that case factor in? That's something about releasing prisoners when it gets too crowded. And I'm not sure I'm saying that exactly perfectly right, but something along those lines.
Right. That was a Supreme Court case where inmates had filed a suit because of the lack of medical attention and psychiatric care, whatever, and the overcrowdedness created a cruel and unusual punishment. The Eighth Amendment says that, you have to treat them humanely. So they won the suit, and the Supreme Court said, okay, by the year 2013, you have to release 33,000 people. That's next year. So California is really under a lot of scrutiny now, and they're looking at all of these different ways that we talked about, releasing that population. So, again, that can have effect on other states.
Thank you so much. And he wants to return back home. I don't know.
Well, you know what? California's got some interesting things going. We'll see what happens.
Oh, okay.
But thanks for your
you so
insight.
much.
Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure.
We'll have you back.
All right.